everybody, and welcome back to another week. We are here talking about the Philadelphia Flyers, and I'm joined by Kevin Durso, the 97.3 Flyers insider. So we're kind of getting down to, I guess you could say, the nitty-gritty of the season. There's 22 games left for the team right now, and it really is kind of starting to form, I guess you could say, that this team really could be in the playoffs by the end of the season. And what do you think? They had a rough, I guess, not rough, they played great, just a couple hard losses. What do you think they need to step up on right now to make sure they get that playoff spot?
To do more of what they did against Tampa Bay, probably. I mean, they really took the challenge that was at hand and did what they had to do in that particular game. They really need to recognize opportunities as well. I think, there's been a handful of games we've already talked about what an opportunity the Stadium Series was, playing New Jersey, the ability to
Mhm.
separate themselves from the Devils. They haven't completely done that yet. They had an opportunity with Pittsburgh. They weren't able to do that either. And that really wasn't a product of the whole team as much as it was, you get better goaltending in that game, you probably win. And now you're seeing another situation just like this. They're going to start this very busy month of March with the Washington Capitals. And that's another team that's right there kind of hanging in the rear view mirror at the moment. And you have an opportunity to create separation and an opportunity to kind of assert your place in the playoffs over them. So you
Mhm.
go out and get a win against a team like that, that takes care of a lot of what's left at this point. And they're going to have opportunities to do that with other teams that are kind of involved in this as well. They've closed out some of their season series within the division, and there's going to be kind of big gaps between some of the others, but all of these teams are competitive. So you shouldn't have really many opportunities to sit back and kind of go, okay, this is a team that's not in the race at all. I think really outside of the games they have against San Jose and Chicago, I can't really think of other teams off the top of my head anyway. They're going to play a bunch of playoff teams, legitimate playoff
Mhm.
teams. The games they have against, they still play Tampa one more time, 2 against Florida, 2 against Toronto, 2 against Boston. You're going to get the gauntlet of some of the best teams in the league. And as such, you have to be ready if you want to be part of this picture. So I think that's good for them. It's good that they're, it's been interesting, to look over and see the calendars turn to March and these games still mean something. We haven't seen this
Mhm.
for a few years. It's exciting to have these games actually carry some meaning from a standings perspective and not so much, hey, we're just a week away from the trade deadline. That's what the meaning is at this point. And then after that, it's, kind of a slow crawl to the end of the season. No, these games actually matter. And
Mhm.
and it really starts right away with this game against Washington to assert your presence in the playoff picture over somebody else who's really trying to chase down that spot.
You were talking about how that you think they need to be taking more opportunities. In the game against the Rangers on Saturday, they had one power play that specifically stood out to me where they could have had at least 3 more shots off in that power play, and it was just too much passing, too much, and it's great to see them, be able to be comfortable enough to take that, but at the same time, that's something that they've struggled with all season, that power play. So for them to not be getting those shots off, especially in a game that was a one-goal game, I think that's something that they have struggled with a lot this season, and coming up in these games, they play, like you said, the Capitals today. At one point, you just need to get the shots off, hope something goes in. You can't always have that perfect shot.
Well, and they look for that sometimes, especially in that game in particular, when you're playing a
Mhm,
goalie as skilled as Igor Shesterkin. I think it gets into your head sometimes that you have to make a perfect play to beat this guy. And
mhm,
sometimes that's not the case. I think it's ironic also that 2 games later they're playing a goalie as elite as Andrei Vasilevsky, who's not having a good night, doesn't look like he's tracking as well as he normally does. So all of a sudden now they're willing to throw more shots toward the net and see the open lane, take the shot, and they were
mhm.
scoring on some of those because of it. So sometimes that's, keeping it simple is really just the formula for this. That, sometimes with that game, I kind of take some things out of that, and, and the power play in general, it's not really going to get rectified this year. At this point, it is what it is.
Yeah.
Um, the problem with the power and the shame of it with the power play is that if it was even just halfway decent, you're talking 10 more, maybe 10 more power play goals over the course of the games they've played so far. How many more wins could that have equated to? We may not even be talking about as much of a playoff race. They might
Mhm.
already be very solidified in that race if they could score a few more goals in that. But it really is what it is at this point. And if they can take advantage of the opportunities they get within a game sometimes, then by all means do it, because it's going to help you win more games down the stretch. But you just hope that that's not the one area that really breaks them in this run, because it certainly could be. I mean, as good as their penalty kill has been, their power play has been at the opposite end of the spectrum. It's the worst
Mhm.
in the league. So, usually teams need to be kind of skilled in both and have some success in both to make it to the playoffs. That's usually what we see. They have a chance to do it in a kind of different way where the power play is not very good, but they do have a lot of success in the penalty kill. And as
Mhm.
such, they win a lot of games because of it. So hopefully this doesn't become the thing that kind of does them in, because it would be a shame if that's the one area, as much as it struggled all year, if that's the one area that kind of gets in the way of this thing.
So right now we have a couple players out, but two huge players for the core of this team. Travis Konechny's been out, and now Jamie Drysdale's out. And you have two games where these teams are losing, and then one game they come back and they have this huge win against Tampa. Do you think that this kind of gives that team a confidence, like, hey, we lost these two, we came back, we had a huge win, huge offensive game for that also, like you were saying, they were taking so many opportunities in that game. Do you think that kind of gives them that confidence of like, we don't need this factor, this factor, this factor, we can still be a winning team without so and so?
It should. And that's really, I think that makes Tuesday's game so important, is that they were able to find a way without those guys, because I think that everybody, especially if you pay a lot of attention to the outside noise, and I know that that's something that they try to keep out of the locker room, but if you happen to let, if any of it leaks in, if you told somebody before that game, you're going to play the Tampa Bay Lightning, who already beat you once and did it convincingly, and you're not going to have Travis Konechny, and now you just lost the previous game. You lost Jamie Drysdale. You're without Rasmus Ristolainen, and you have injuries defensively. Your goaltending situation is now dealing with more questions. There's so many things that kind of came into play with that, and most people from the outside would probably have said, well, then you're going to lose that game. The losing streak's going to continue. You're going to lose 3 straight, and we're going to have big questions about the playoff picture again. And everybody's going to yell, sell, 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 as the deadline comes up faster. And the team kind of stuck it to everybody with the way that they played, and gets a confidence boost as well. And I think there's another layer to this that goes beyond injury, to be honest, because Sean Couturier is playing fewer minutes, and maybe, he may be battling through a little something. It's not enough to keep him out of the lineup, but the fact that he's playing fewer minutes than a lot of these guys, and it just has to do with who's rolling on any given night. That's what John Tortorella says anyway. That to me is also a big confidence booster, because it says you don't need a player like that to be your best player every single night to win a game. It's
Mm-hmm.
been really good to see, a line like Ryan Poehling, Noah Cates, and Garnet Hathaway be the best line on the ice and bring it from a depth perspective. It was good to see in Tuesday's game in particular. It was good to see some of the defensemen who were able to step up and score goals that haven't done that as frequently lately. It feels like Travis Sanheim's come around on that a lot lately. He scored more goals in the last week, I think, than he had in the previous 2 months. So that's a big step. Sean Walker getting a goal, that helps as well. And another factor to it also is that as much as they've missed Travis Konechny, and they will as long as he's out, Tyson Forster came back into the lineup
Mm-hmm.
right when he went out, and all of a sudden has kind of picked up the scoring as well. So when somebody else gives you a boost for the guy who went out and is kind of scoring at the rate that Konechny was anyway, that's a big help too. So Forster's been kind of a godsend in all of this at this given moment, because of the fact that not only did he come back to the lineup when Konechny went out, but he came back and immediately produced and has been
Mm-hmm.
a key player for them for this little stretch that they're on as well. So those are all key factors to this. And if you can do this without your leading scorer, without arguably your best player, and especially on nights when things may not be going your way completely. They had a couple of games where it didn't work out and they lost games because something wasn't up to par with how they need to play. And then they play kind of 2 weird periods where things aren't really flowing the way that they normally are against Tampa. And then the third period turns out to be what it was. And I think that's a huge confidence booster as the most recent thing that's happened, that third period, to go into the next phase of this season, which is this busy month of March that they have.
You talked about how the previous game, especially the Cates, Paling, and the Hathaway line, and that's that third line coming up. And there's teams at top 2 teams, Vancouver Canucks. They've had a season where you've seen just full lines through and through. Where at one point their third, fourth line, their Connor Garland, Dakota Joshua, Teddy Bluger line was producing the most. And I think that you saying how that line with Hathaway and Cates and Paling coming out, I think that's something that if they keep consistent is going to make this team so much more offensively prominent at this point in the season, because right now, like you said, TK was just kind of putting up the points. Owen Tippett was just putting up the points, and seeing all these people come out and these players just all producing, I think is going to really help that team do this playoff push right now.
Yeah, and I think that also it's timing wise for everything too. When they lost Owen Tippett for a few games and it was coming up on the All-Star break, that was a rough period for them, and it looked like they missed Tippett. But Tippett kind of hasn't picked back up the scoring the way that he did before that. So it's good to see that other guys can step in. They're still winning games without that. If they were completely relying on Konechny's got to score and Tippett's got to score, then they're a team that's in trouble. But you've seen, and it's more than just those two guys too. Joel Farabee's cooled off a lot, and he was kind of carrying the offense at a time. You need to see other guys be able to step in and do something about it to help you win some games. And that's what, that's where Forster really comes in, because I think Forster's been one of the keys to this whole thing. I think that when he's healthy and especially as he builds confidence, he could become a really key part of this. The fact, you bring up a guy like Bobby Brink too, and he scores less than 3 minutes into his first game back at the NHL level after going down for 11 games. That's huge for them, that they can get a guy like that out of the minors, put him in the lineup, and immediately he's doing something that affects the way that this team plays and can help influence the way that a game goes, and is able to really put his stamp on games. That's all going to be effective for them. So if they can keep getting it from different avenues like that, it's going to go a long way. You've seen, another guy who stepped up a lot lately is Scott Lawton. And again, a guy who plays bottom 6 minutes more than anything else, but a guy who's obviously key to the room, and a guy who does a lot of the little things away from the offense. But when he can chip in with the offense, especially when other guys aren't going, that's going to go a long way. So they're getting it from a lot of different places right now. And that's another sign that they belong in the conversation of the playoffs, because teams that make the playoffs typically have really good depth, and they're showing they have some good depth in the NHL lineup right now.
Bouncing off you talking about Bobby Brink, that was a player he was kind of huge at the beginning of the season. He was super big in producing and being that prominent on that offense, and then he got sent back down. And now, right now, especially with those players out, do you think he's a piece that could be part of this puzzle that could take us into the playoffs and maybe help us out even in the playoffs?
Certainly. And I hope that his mentality is that I don't want to go back down. That I took, sure, you get sent down, you got to take that on the chin when they tell you it's not your time right now, or that you're not playing to a level that keeps you in the NHL. But if you go, he went down and he played well, and then he comes back up and now he's already made an impact. That needs to carry over to tonight against Washington, tomorrow against Ottawa, and keep going especially as long as he's got a place, because especially as you see things that influence that he'll be in the lineup. We pretty much know at this point, based on some of the comments that John Tortorella made over the last couple of days, Cam Atkinson's the guy who's not getting back in the lineup right now at forward. So Brink's going to play. That's already a step in the right direction for him. He's going to play. Atkinson's got to earn his way back in. They don't know about Konechny whenever he'll come back. For right now, that means Brink's got an opportunity to do something about this, and to really cement his place as an NHL capable player. And as much as this was the interesting part to me, is because John Tortorella definitely focuses on the play away from the puck a lot, and wants to see the tendencies and the knowledge to do the right things in those situations. But he did say before Tuesday's game, he's here to bring offense. So I want to see offense. And then he delivers it right away. That's what I hope they continue to see with him as they move forward, is that he is here to bring offense. He's here to be kind of, it's kind of interesting that he goes in and Atkinson comes out as a healthy scratch, because to me, they could be similar type players. They're similar in size, obviously. And then on top of that, I think they could be similar type players if Brink really starts putting it all together. And there's an element from an offensive side where I think Brink is a little fearless to an extent, where, it didn't, obviously he went up on a rush against, Tampa Bay, and Andrei Vasilevsky's the goalie, and he's not intimidated by that at all. I'm just going to throw a shot on goal and see what happens. And it finds the net. So that's kind of the attitude I think he needs to have, is to kind of keep moving forward in that direction, play with a confidence that he knows he can be here and he doesn't want to go back. And I think that'll work wonders for him if he wants to stay in this lineup.
I think I'm biased because I love Bobby Brink. I went to one game, and there's a Bobby Brink fan club that comes and they hold up giant pictures of Bobby Brink. And they were at games when he got sent back down, and they were at games holding up pictures of Bobby Brink. And I think it's the greatest thing ever. I
wonder if that's a message to Torts then, because
if it is, I think he listened. So that might have been, it's, like, really, like, huge signs, like, that they hold up, like, posters and, like, banners, I guess you could say.
And that's great to hear though too, because it shows that fans are caring again and that they're latching on
Mhm,
to players that can be a part of the future. So that's an important part of this as well. Like whether it's a player who does ultimately stick in this thing or not, or whether it's a player we're talking about with the deadline coming up or not, it doesn't make a difference. The
mhm,
fans are really gravitating towards this team and certain parts of this team, and that's a big part of this as well. So, and I think that that's also why it's important for them to try to finish this thing off.
mhm,
As much as there's talk about what's going to happen potentially over the course of the next week and what could change about this team, they've got to maintain the goal that at this point you've come this far. We're 3/4 of the way through the season. You've come this far, finish the job and get to the
mhm,
playoffs because I think a lot of fans want to see it at this point. Whether that was the intention or not coming in
mhm,
terms of rebuilding and all that type of stuff, they're this far along in the process. Nobody has supplanted them from that third spot in the Metro. Give the fans at this point a chance to kind of continue to get behind this team and the vibe they've given this city and put the finishing touches on the playoff run if you can. And look, that doesn't mean they're going to be doing nothing over the next week
mhm,
because they've got to honor whatever they can get in terms of what the players they have available and keeping this thing moving in a positive direction that isn't just about this year but many years to come. But to be this far into this season and be there and get fans coming out like that, I think that says a lot about what they've done over the last year to get to this point.
and it's a completely different energy in Wells Fargo right now. I remember this time in the season last year going to games with my cousin, it was kinda like people were just there to be there, you know what I mean? Like, it was like everyone was there,
Yeah.
they weren't super engaged in the game, but like I said, I was at the game this past Saturday, I took my mom actually, and she was, like, kinda, like, taken aback. It was the energy, you could just feel it. It was especially since it was that Metro game, it was, a rivalry game, but the fans are completely engaged. There's an energy in Wells Fargo right now that's just completely palpable to everyone else in the room that people are so invested in this team right now.
And they continue to be involved in every game,
Mhm,
even games. They give up 7 goals on Sunday to Pittsburgh, and that you hear that number, you think they get blown out. No, they scored 6 on their own too, and they
mhm.
kept coming back and keeping it close throughout the course of that game. So they're never out of a game, and I think the fact that they're willing to work towards that and continue to push back despite things not going their way in certain in whatever direction it may go. They looked great against the Rangers. They got goalied in that game by Shesterkin. That's the way that it goes sometimes.
Mhm,
And it's unfortunate that the game in Pittsburgh went the way that it did because if you score 6 goals, you should win a game, and they didn't. But at least again, they were in that game too, despite giving up 7. It's really impressive how they really just don't go away in this, and,
mhm,
and that's kind of I think the feel of the whole playoff situation too, is that to get to 3/4 of the way through the season and be in this spot where they're still in a playoff spot, it's kind of the same thing. They're
mhm.
not going away, and everybody thinks
Yeah,
they might at some point. When is it going to happen where this team's just going to go away and be what everybody thought they were going to be, and they keep coming back and saying no, we're not going away. So you might as well not go away until you make it to the playoffs at
mhm,
this point, because that's the way that this is shaping up to be. And it is tough at this time of year because it is such a tight knit group. You can see it. You can see it when they play, and I certainly see it whenever I step into the locker room and I'm around some of the guys. That you feel that they're a tight knit group, and that's the only concern at this point, is that if something is to go in the next week and somebody's not there anymore, they can
mhm,
deal with it when it's an injury, and they can deal with it when somebody goes down and has to be away for a few games or something like that. And they've really, to this point, because it's been a few weeks now, they've overcome the Carter Hart thing pretty well too, in terms of
mhm,
not letting it affect everything overall. They've rallied around Sam Harrison and been able to play well with him as the number one. So it seems like they've gotten over a lot of obstacles, but this could be one, especially at this time of year, where you take something away from the team and it's permanent for the rest of the season anyway. That's certainly something that can challenge you. And we'll see how that goes, and we'll see what kind of plays out, because there's so much up in the air right now. But that is certainly something that I'm watching for as the deadline hits, is because they're going to have guys that have been such a key part to this, that if they're not there in another week, what's it going to look like when they come back to
mhm.
play? That's the thing that I'm watching for the most.
I had somebody ask me, I think, like, 2 weeks ago, and they said, "What do you think about" the trade deadline, and I was like personal opinion, like about the whole thing, and they're like, no, like the Flyers going into it, and I was like, I mean, I think there's names out there, and he was like, he's a Devils fan, so he was like, I couldn't believe he said it. He was like, I wouldn't even touch them. I was like, what? And he was like, I wouldn't touch that team with a 10-foot pole right now. He was like, I wouldn't want to move a single piece with how they're kind of chugging along right now. And I know he has a point, but at this point, you do have to think about how they're saying it's that rebuild and it's
Hmm.
the new era, and they could be like, hey, we're a playoff team now, but we want to be a playoff team this year, and this year coming up. So as much as you want to see the team stick together, you kind of have to think about the fact that right now they could be thinking about being a playoff team for years to come and what they can do right now to make that happen.
And as true as that is, it's not something that involves a lot of pieces though either. That's
Mhm.
the other kind of key thing to it. Like I look at a player like Scott Lawton who's being talked about a lot, but he's not an expiring contract right now. So
Mhm.
because of that, they're not under any pressure to move that contract or really worry about. I mean, if they get blown away with an offer, then maybe they would consider it, obviously, but they can just stand their ground and say, if you don't give us, above and beyond of what we could
Mhm.
possibly expect for this guy, we'd rather have him in our room. And well, look, maybe we'll talk in the offseason then. But for right now,
Mhm.
he's key to this playoff run. So
Yeah.
we're going to keep him because you're not giving us anything of value, of enough value at this given point in time. That doesn't, because of that, I can't think of another forward that would be moved. There's nobody else I can think of. The only guy who was on an expiring contract that would have even been a candidate was Ryan Poehling, and they
Mhm.
obviously extended him already. They made their decision. So there's nobody to touch in the forward position. The key is defensively, because their best defensive pairing and their most consistent defensive pairing all season has been Sean Walker and Nick Seeler. And that's two guys who are on expiring contracts. And that's where you have to think, what's the better
Mhm.
thing to do here? Trade one or both away because you'll get good value and get something back in return that you hopefully can use toward your future, or try to extend them, and if so, for what and how long? Because that's the other part of the equation, is you don't want to be extending a guy as valuable as both have been. You don't want to be extending guys like that for 4 or 5 years
Mhm.
and setting yourself up to be trapped in a contract that kind of you just got out of by moving some pieces this past offseason. You want to make sure that you leave spots open for other people. And it's been a weird kind of situation that got them to this point, that they called up Ronnie Adder this week, and it's injuries that got them there. Obviously, that can change in an instant, where,
Mhm.
as soon as a guy gets healthy enough, Adder could be going right back down to the minors, and that's the end of that conversation. But I wonder if you're also looking at this as an opportunity to say, listen, if Rasmus Ristolainen comes back right around the deadline, let's say,
Mhm.
okay, then Adder could stay. And if you moved one of those other guys, does it solve part of the problem? Does it help keep this thing moving in the direction where you're still competitive this year, but you did right by the rebuild
Mhm.
situation and traded away a guy who had value, whether it's Walker or Sealer? So that's kind of the interesting part of this. And it's funny because as I was watching Tuesday's game and Walker scored the goal that he did, and he's fired up about it, and he's showing emotion, and he's that kind of guy. I'm sitting there kind of thinking, that they're gonna miss him when he's gone, if and when he's
Yeah.
gone. And sure enough, 24 hours later, the trade that kind of was supposed to get the defensive market going happens, and it wasn't overly impressive in terms of return value. And all of a sudden, I'm sitting there thinking, now I don't know if they're going to trade him, because if
Mhm.
that's what the best is, as far as I'm concerned, the best defenseman on the market was going to get, then they might not get what they want, and they might just say, you know what, we're keeping him. End of
Mhm.
conversation. And that's really interesting to me, that that's the way that this could go. So, things can change quickly. And if a lot of teams are involved and there's a bidding war that happens, then they might still get what they want. But I wasn't impressed by the Chris Tanev deal that kind of got this
Mhm.
ball rolling. And it makes me think that they might be more inclined to use that stance. We don't have to do anything, so we're not gonna, unless you offer us exactly what we want. And it puts the ball in the other team's court. And it's interesting because as much as they should move guys to try to get something in, Danny Briere, as a first-year GM, doesn't want to come across as a pushover
Mhm.
in this situation, that I'm just going to cave to whatever I can get. He really needs to do what he can to kind of assert his presence in these negotiations, and that he's going to be somebody who doesn't just kind of give in to these situations, that
Mhm.
do what everybody thinks they should do, and keep guys around maybe that are helping the situation, and who knows where it goes from there. The only thing you hope for is that whatever value, we're not going to know the answers to these questions right now, but whatever value may be on the table for these guys, that's what you hope he doesn't leave behind if it's something that feels like it was too good to pass up.
Mhm.
Like all the rumors that were going around last offseason with Scott Lawton about there was a first or a first and second that was on the table at one point. If that's what's out there, you don't want to turn that down.
Yeah.
That's probably too good to be true. But if it's not good, if someone's calling about Nick Seeler and going, I'll give you a third, I don't see them making the move. I just don't see them thinking that that's what this is worth at this point. I think they want
Mhm.
first and second picks. And if they're not going to get them, they're going to say we're more than content to keep this team together because we like them. And that's,
Mhm.
that's the way that it is. If you're not allowing the market to dictate where we think this should go for what they're worth or what we feel they're worth to us, then we're not going to make the deal. And that would really be an interesting thing for Danny Briere to do in his first year, to not kind of give in to where this all could go and to just take what he can get for guys. I think that would be very impactful for his future as a general manager in the league.
So coming up tonight, they are playing the Capitals. This is another in-conference game, and the Capitals were behind them earlier this week in the standings, but now they've dropped down to 7th in the standings. But it's still a huge game because, again, those teams are so close in the standings. It's a 5-6 point difference in all of them, and we've talked this season about them going up against teams with big name players. So you've got on this team, you've got Ovechkin, and you got TJ Oshie coming into this game. So it's kind of that double-edged sword with the pressure of the in-conference game and the big name players. How do you think this matchup is going to look tonight?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because they've been playing better lately. The Capitals
Mhm.
kind of looked like they were going to be one of these teams that faded, and they've played better lately. I think that one of the keys for the Flyers is to try to get ahead of this thing early, potentially, and not allow the Capitals to have a lot of life. They know the interesting part about where both teams are in the standings is
Mhm.
for both teams know the importance of this game, but for one of them, you're not in the spot that you want to be in, and you have to win games. It's not that
Mhm.
the Flyers don't have to win this game or don't want to win this game. They obviously should, but there's more pressure on the Capitals. You're the team that's behind in the standings. You have the pressure to try to win because you've got to close the gap if you want to get there.
Mhm.
The Flyers will have other opportunities to continue to build on this lead beyond just playing the Capitals. So I think a lot of the pressure falls on the Capitals. They haven't been a great defensive team this year. They've given up a lot of goals, and they haven't scored near as many as we're used to seeing. I think their scoring kind of has gone as Ovechkin's scoring has gone. His season total is way lower than we typically expect,
Mhm.
and that in and of itself stands out. And then you look at they got a negative 33 goal differential this year. It's substantial. There's only that's 7th in the division. There's only one team worse than that in the division, and that's
Mhm.
Columbus. So for them to be a team like that ironically too has kind of played roughly 500 all season long, but has that big of a gap in goal differential, it means they're giving up a lot of goals in certain situations. And if the Flyers can kind of especially establish the rush early that they're so successful with and take away the opportunities that Washington would want to have out of this,
Mhm.
I think it can go a long way for them. So I'm looking to see how they come out from the start. Both teams are going to have had some extended rest to this point, haven't played in a little while. That's also going to kind of determine how this game starts, I think. So I'm wondering if this is one of these games where you're trying to come out and really show some energy really early and play with pace really early because you haven't for a little while. You should have the energy. And I think obviously another key, we know how good Ovechkin is, especially on the power play. They didn't take a lot of penalties against Tampa. They really kept it
Mhm.
disciplined. They didn't really give Tampa the opportunity to play with their biggest strength, which is the power play. I think if you can do that with Washington as well, despite the fact that Washington's power play is nowhere near what Tampa's is in terms of ranking in the league, if Washington gets on a power play, you know where the shots are usually coming from, and you know that it's not an easy thing to stop. Ovechkin's got so many goalies in his book over the course of his career, and Sam Erson's one of them. So assuming that Erson's getting the start, which I wouldn't expect any different at this point in a game of this magnitude, um, I think you just want to avoid those situations, avoid allowing their best guys to be out on the ice all at once and let them kind of play to, you know, what we were talking about earlier too. Try to match the depth. Can they get the
Mhm.
same depth that the Flyers have had over the course of the last few weeks? If the Flyers can continue to get, the Ryan Palings and Garnet Hathaways contributing the way that they have in the same way, that they have over the course of the last few games, and that's what helps beat a team like Washington, that's going to be key to keeping this thing moving. So that's what I'm looking for, is a good
Mhm.
start, trying to keep Washington off the power play, see if you can establish the rush early in this game and kind of play to your strengths over their strengths and see if you can do all of those things as effectively as you've done over the last handful of games.
So that game tonight will be on 1041, and you can find updates on the ESPN Instagram. The game preview and post game recap will be on the 97.3 website, and we will be back again next week to talk more about the Flyers.